My name is Jackie Uvichis. I'm a senior, and I got into working with the female inmates at Mercer County Correctional Center by tutoring them with resume and cover letter jobs.
My name is Gale Muhammed. I'm the president and founder of Women Who Never Give Up. We're a 501c nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families get justice in our criminal justice and prison system. We've been on the front line advocating for those that are incarcerated and our children of the incarcerated for better policy and treatment for our loved ones that are incarcerated. I married Tariq Muhammed at East Jersey State Prison on November the 21st, 1992, and I have to smile because it was like a great day that day. And I was pretty much a prisoner's advocate wife. I wanted to find out how you could be in prison innocent. My husband was not guilty of the crime to which he was convicted for, and has spent the past 5 years that I had been with him in his life fighting for his freedom and to get his case appealed. But he lost that fight on March the 5th, 1997. And that is what made me really begin to look at the criminal justice system and the fact that a prison sentence could ultimately turn into a death sentence if you got sick because of the inadequate medical care. And that's what made me found Women Who Never Give Up.
So every time we volunteered, we had to take ethnographical notes. Basically, that was sort of an analysis of what we did that day and like the things we observed while in Mercer County Correctional Center. And then at the end of that, we had to sort of compare each other's notes, and then I had to write a research paper on some of the main topics that I thought were important. And I chose the inequality of resources and services between men and women, and I also focused more on mental illness.
Okay.
And how that affects the women in their lives and their children by being incarcerated.
When my husband was sick, there was nobody that could help me. All of the organizations that were around at that time couldn't help me. I don't want to say who they are, but I called all the major organizations. But people in prisons' lives are looked upon as not important. They're stereotyped, I guess you could say, that everybody in prison deserves to be there. If you do the crime, you do the time. I mean, you know, I was one of those people, to be truthfully speaking. I never ever understood it the way I do now. And so I have spent the past 25 years traveling throughout the state of New Jersey and throughout the rest of the country, educating people about the criminal justice system.
There was another woman that we talked to. Her name was Crystal, and I hadn't talked to her at first, and I had just heard about her story. She had raped a 14-year-old boy while she was babysitting him, and then had also been forced to molest her child by her husband. Her husband had forced her to do this, so she was registered on Megan's Law. She was in the sex offender registry, and I talked to her one day, and she seemed like she definitely had some mental illness, but she also seemed like a very, very intelligent woman. She was helping like some of the other inmates, like she knew more about the law system than we did. So there was like clearly like she was smarter, but she had also been, she was also like a victim of incest when she was a child, and she was taken off to typhus. So I think like before I knew her backstory, I sort of made a judgment about her and the things that she had done. But then, you know, sort of learning about her childhood and how she'd grown up, there was a few days when she had just been in a house alone when she was like 7 or 8 for days, like no parents, no food. It was just her and her younger brother. And they had just been in there, and luckily one of their neighbors found them. And I think it was just one of the things like that where she really didn't have like a chance. You know, she was sort of set up from childhood to sort of go down this like rockier path. So I think like learning everyone's like history really helps to understand why people do what they do, and to not make as quick of a judgment as you would. I think one of the main issues with reintegration back into the community for offenders is that there's this stigma that's been sort of forced on these people. They've served their time, and that's why they're out. You know, they did the crime, they did the time, and unfortunately, I think that there is a lot of the time this follows people around, especially if they're looking for jobs, they're looking for housing. This just makes it so much harder for them to reintegrate back into the community, which can lead them back to the sort of path that got them incarcerated in the first place. So I think one of the main things that people can do is sort of to get educated about it and to give people the benefit of the doubt. For employment agencies, they have the box that you check. There's this whole thing about banning the box that's saying that, you know, you have to disclose that you've been incarcerated or you've been convicted of a felony at some point. But I think that why the ban the box is so important is because you don't have to say it immediately. Getting an interview, you're allowed to sort of state your case. I think people have these preconceived notions about men and women who have convicted crimes, and they're just going to write them off before they even learn what the crime was or what the circumstances were. Sometimes it's not as black and white as it seems, so I think people just need to take the time to listen and to understand that things aren't always as cut and dry, you know. I think sometimes incarceration can just be a quick fix. It's just removing someone out of the community immediately. But I think one of the main things is that there needs to be an increase in kind of resources that help these incarcerated individuals after their release. So like job skills, learning how to do interviews, learning how to apply for housing. I don't think that there's enough pressure or there's enough sort of focus on this, and then these people are just released out back into a community. They have to have some sort of, you know, a registered house. But a lot of the times if they come from unstable backgrounds, this isn't necessarily a place they want to be. And if they really want to, you know, get back and get their life, like they really want to shape up, I think that there are a lot of obstacles in the way that kind of hinder this. And I think that there needs to be more of a reform for just learning certain skills so that you don't have to, you know, revert back to their ways that got them incarcerated in the first place. I think that having a support system after they're released from incarceration really helps recidivism, having people that keep them on track and keep them focused on, you know, a life that is free of crime. However, I think that that's a little idealistic because there are a lot of people who don't have those sort of resources and they don't have that kind of support. They don't really have a family structure. Maybe they have a few friends. Maybe they have like a sibling or one parent or something along those lines. But yeah, I think that the biggest thing is having a network of people who are focused on like being law-abiding.
There's minimal resources for women returning home. And the hurdles are just unbelievable, what they have to go through to try to get their children back if their children have been put in foster care, or even if their children are being cared for by a family member, it's still red tape to get them back. The job market is not there. It's just really a bittersweet, because you want to see them come home, and you want to see people be able to reclaim their life, and that's been so hindered because of the economic devastation that we're dealing with today. New Jersey, I believe there's a 13% unemployment rate. So if you got people like regular people with non-criminal backgrounds competing with people who have a criminal background, they're not going to get that job. So you have a big homeless situation that's going to occur, and is occurring, with women who are formerly incarcerated. So one of my things as a nonprofit, we're trying to get our transitional house for women. I really want to start connecting with them prior to their release, so that we can pretty much put, I like to call it a blueprint of your life together, so that we can really find out what it is that they need, and we can support them with wraparound services that will help them acquire a sustainable lifestyle where they can take care of their children and get their lives back together. And right now, that's not happening.
My findings were that because there are so few women's sort of facilities, that there's a lot of times there's overcrowding, they don't have enough resources, and oftentimes, I know Mercer County Correctional Center is being shut down. They haven't decided when exactly yet, but they're going to be shutting it down at some point in the near future, and all of these women are going to have to transfer to Clinton, because most of them are going to have to transfer to Clinton, and that's going to be a huge issue for these women, because there are so few female institutions in the state of New Jersey. They're going to have to move all the way up north, and that removes them from their families, and that further puts strains on their relationships with their significant other or their children. And this in turn this stress leads them to unhealthy coping methods and things like that, and it sort of exacerbates some certain mental illnesses. Another thing that I focused on was there was the lack of movement, they said, a lot in the prison. The male inmates, from what I was told, have recreational time 5 days a week, and the women have it 5 times a month, and sometimes sporadically. So they could either have it twice in 1 week, and then they don't have rec for a few weeks after that. They never know when it's coming. But whereas the male inmates have it they have it Monday through Friday. So I thought that was really, there was a big difference in how the women were treated in that regard. Women didn't have access to laptops. They had a laptop, and it was transferred to the male unit because they needed it more. There was more men, so they didn't get access to it. The men also have a bigger law library, which can also help with learning more about their cases, and how, what their charges are going to be, what their bail is going to be, whereas the women had a much tinier library, and it wasn't even really, there are a few law books, but it was mostly like coping. It was mostly stereotypically feminine books. So it would be like coping with your children and like loss of that nature. And yes, that's important, but that also doesn't help them to learn more about their crimes and what they're being charged with, and what they can do and how much time they have, So I thought that was all just very interesting.
I think that it takes people in the community to get involved in the criminal justice system.
One of the biggest things that I think needs reform is our drug policies. I think a lot of the reason that there's overcrowding in prisons is because people are in for drug charges, and I think that by sort of decriminalizing this and making it more of a mental health issue, we would decrease crowding, as well as sort of decreasing the stigma behind drug abuse, because I do believe that it's an addiction, and people do need professional help for that. I don't think they get that in prisons. I also think that putting the mentally ill in prison is wrong, and I think that also leads to just an overcrowding and a lack of treatment for these individuals who may have committed a crime because they were sick, not because they are bad people. They're just sick, and I think that they need proper psychological and psychiatric help. And yeah, those are I guess the drug reform and the mental illness are the two areas that I think that would benefit the criminal justice system.
The judge had to reluctantly dismiss his case, but raised issues that he would have won on if he had lived long enough to fight. So it was sort of a vindication for the both of us, even though he didn't win, but we knew that he didn't have a fair trial. The judge said so in that court, and also raised issues that he could have used in the lower courts to win his freedom, but he died. I always would hear, "Oh, you got one of the good guys," and I really thought I did, and I think that's why I lost my mind when he died, because I always felt like if he had better medical care, he might have still been here today. And so it's just really hard for me to hear when families have loved ones that are sick. I really try to fight for them to get medical care. It's like a pet peeve of mine. I really go hard for that. But it hasn't stopped me from helping, from burying, to continue to bury men that have died in prison. It's been rough. Because the medical care is still inadequate, and people just don't care, and that's just hard. So I hope to continue to be a voice for the voiceless. I think Tariq Muhammed's spirit lives in me, so I don't really get much rest these days, because not only do I have my passion, I'm dealing with his passion too. So I probably will. I always tell you, I'll be doing this work after I'm dead too. So, because I'll be in you, and I'll be in you, and I'll be in everybody's spirit. So.